expression. I'm your host, Maggy Martinez. This week we are diving into a topic that don't make headlines but affects every single American wallet: the independence of the Federal Reserve. And what happens when politics and central banking collide? President Trump has publicly attacked Fed Chair Jerome Powell and signaled intention to exert tighter control over U.S. monetary policy if reelected. Yes, reelected. That's what their MAGA hats are saying, 2028. Supporters says it's about accountability and economic vision. Critics warn it's a dangerous overreach that could destabilize global markets. Joining me today to unpack this is political analyst Dante Long, a state member for the Democratic Party of Georgia, and David Henry. He's the chair for the Republican Party here in Clayton County, Georgia. Let's dive into it.
Presents Starbound Studios starring Maggy Martinez and the Hot Seat Interview. Ahora con ustedes,
Maggy Martinez. Today is David Henry. He's the chair for the Republican Party of Clayton County in Georgia, and Dante Long. He's the state member for the Democratic Party of Georgia. Welcome, David.
Maggie, I tell you what, it's great to be back here on the hot seat waiting for the conversation.
And Maggie, as always, a pleasure to be here with you on the hot seat with the listening audience, and can't wait to dig into tonight's conversation.
Well, Dante, do you believe the Federal Reserve should operate independently from the White House, or should the president have more authority to influence interest rates and inflation control?
Well, Maggie, I think if you look historically, the Federal Reserve has by and large, operated independently of the White House, while dialogue generally between the administration and the Federal Reserve is, or rather does occur. It is still always the Federal Reserve that makes the necessary decisions concerning the interest rates and the inflation that has its ultimate effect upon the economy of the United States of America. And now, for some reason, the president seems to believe that he can maybe tweak this a little more to unbalance the authority of the Federal Reserve and perhaps give him just a little bit more leverage in how the Federal Reserve operates inside of the United States of America.
David.
Well, as Dante said, yes, the Federal Reserve does operate independently. The only time you can actually look back is, remember, as far as your chairman and your reserve board members, the president nominates, the Senate confirms. So that is about the only time they actually relate to each other, if you will. You know, it was right there at the beginning. Now, we know the Donald and Jerome Powell, they've had a contemptuous relationship for years. And we got to remember that President Trump did nominate him back in 2017. So he is a Trump guy, if you will, theoretically. He is a Trump nominee to this position. However, due to the way Congress, and we're going to discuss this later on as we get into this conversation, we do know that the Fed Reserve, or the Fed as we call it, has an autonomous role where they operate independently and they come back to Congress. That's all they're responsible for, them and the people of the United States of America.
Well, Dante, her rebuttal for what he says, because now next year President Trump has to nominate again the Fed leadership. So, and then with the control of the Senate, what is your take about that?
Well, I'm sure that the president will do what he does best, and that is to nominate someone that will serve his special interest and to help him with his agenda. And so I believe that we're going to continue to see the president, for lack of a better word, manipulate the process by allowing those who serve his interests to serve there on the Commission of the Federal Reserve.
David, you know that Congress is really quiet and Congress is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. What is your take for this nomination next year?
Well, right now, Board of Governors who run the Federal Reserve Board and also the chairman, they serve on staggered terms. Jerome's term is up May of 26, right off the top of my head. Double check that, folks, right off the top of my head. So President Trump will be nominating someone, and it will go to the Senate for confirmation. Now, we don't know how long that could take, nor do we know a year from now or so which way it's going to go. You could have a contentious nominating process. It could be a smooth process. I'm sure there's going to be arguments no matter what from each side. So my thought is, let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. Well, turn in every Thursday for the Hot Seat interview on YouTube on demand. It's important that you share the show, look at it, like it, because this helps the algorithm of the show. Also, I wrote a book. It's called The Secrets of Campaigning. So you think you could run. It's on Amazon. It's only $25. Give it to your friends, those that are running for office, or for yourself, so you know what a candidate goes through. Also, if it's in your heart and you want to make a donation to the show, that way we could keep the conversation that we have it right now, where we only bring the facts and only the facts. Like David said, the facts and not the flaws.
We're bringing you the facts without the fluff.
Without the flaws, because we want to make this show unique in those terms and bring to you the truth and nothing but the truth. And you can visit starboundpr.com and make your donation, because this will help keep the conversation going. Well, David, Donald Trump recently called Jerome Powell incompetent and hinted at replacing him. Is this just political posturing or a real threat to the economy, checks and balance?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we've all seen, Donald Trump is not afraid to get in there and mix words. As I said, he is not a politician. He is a businessman. Could that lead to some of the contentious behavior? Probably. Because in business, you have to stand up and fight for what you get. Now, we know, like I said, Trump appointed him in 2017, Biden renominated, and he's still there. So we know the chairman's role, he's got a tough job. He's got to analyze domestic and international financial and economic developments. They got to keep up with that. They're looking at supervising and regulating the Federal Reserve banks and administering consumer protection laws, among other things. Now, yes, understand that why, and here again, this is another step we're going to get to later on, about the back and forth. I know President Trump wants business in the country to move faster at a quicker pace. Jerome Powell is slowing it down a little bit. So you see between the two of them checks and balances that are built into the system, which are working. Now, it's hard to believe that Trump nominated the man and then he calls him incompetent. But however, that's some of the stuff they go back and forth with, him and Elon. Will they ever get back together? Possibly. There's the argumentation that each person is headstrong, and you're seeing it play out in public. So there's definitely no behind the scenes going on here, folks. It's all put out in front. Nothing behind the curtain, as we say.
Well, Dante, Democrats often defend the Fed's autonomy, but what responsibility does Congress have in overseeing the Federal Reserve without politicizing it?
Well, I think that we all know that, as I said on the onset, the Federal Reserve is autonomous. It is their job to look at domestic and international economic trends and to set in place regulations, to set in place also current interest rates. And these decisions really have a major effect upon each American as to how we buy homes, cars, borrow money, etc. these major life decisions that you and I make as Americans should not be politicized. I don't believe in my lifetime I've ever seen so much back and forth between the White House and the Federal Reserve. Now, Congress, we ask, what is your role? We're looking at Congress to really have backbone, to say to the president, let the Federal Reserve do their job. Allow the chairman to do what he does best, to help put in whatever is necessary to maintain the economy. While I know the president made a campaign promise that he was going to speed it up, he was going to get Americans back to work, he was going to bring the jobs back, he was going to bring down the cost of groceries, he was going to do this and that and give everybody whatever they wanted. But as we've seen, this has not happened. And so because it hadn't happened, I think our president now is trying his very best to get his guy to do what he wants.
Well, this question is for both. The Fed's job is to control inflation. It's important that people understand really what the Federal Reserve does. And certainly because of the tariff and what's going on around the world, because decisions made by President Trump affects us all, not only the United States, but all around the world. And David, should monetary policy decisions be made by unelected economists or that enlisted on undemocratic?
Well, how many more elections do we want to have and put up with different people running for office? To me, if you're going to say that the economists, yes, they're probably unelected. However, these guys were put in cabinet positions. They were nominated, confirmed by the Senate, as far as our Federal Reserve Board members, and they have their job. Now, we look at a lot of scholars that we have nominated to positions because of their educational background. Now, we look at the feds, they do influence the money and credit conditions, and their job, they're bound to their pursuit of employment, stable prices. Also, they're supervising and regulating banks to make sure that we have safety and soundness in our banks, banking and finance, and also consumer protection. Now, to me, I do want somebody around that understands economics. If you don't understand economics, you're not going to understand business. If you don't understand business, understand financing for business, to me, is different. You're not going to just comprehend it. I do think that we have some good scholars from both sides of the aisle that understand this. And that's why, to me, it's a nominating process. You nominate, everything is staggered. And the confirmation is left up to the Senate. But it does keep the politics, to a point, out of it.
Dante.
And Maggie, this really goes back to the question you just asked. What is Congress' role? Well, we've seen Congress, to David's point, who is put in place to ensure that the Federal Reserve's consumer protections are an advantage for the American people. But you've had several bills come across the floor that has rolled back a lot of the consumer protections for the American people. So no, I don't think Congress is going to stand up and say, hey, listen, Mr. President, you need to lay off the Federal Reserve, let him do his job, when they have been the very ones, the elected officials, that have rolled back consumer protections that benefit you and I as the American public.
Well, David, Trump argues that Fed's policy have held back growth. I think it's something else, but if he's right, what reforms will a Republican-led administration pursue, and how do we protect long-term economic stability?
Well, as I said earlier, number one, the Fed has a very, very broad job. Okay. Number two, Jerome Powell knows Trump can't fire him. Okay. He can complain, argue, whatever. He is constitutionally protected in his job, and so are members of the Federal Reserve Board governors. They cannot be fired or dismissed just because of their policy views. So they can stand up and voice their opinion, their agreement or disagreement. They can't be fired. They have a job to do, and here again, nobody's ever going to be happy all the time. Somebody's going to be disgruntled. But the way it's set up is they are protected so they can have their differences of opinion. Now, when you're looking at, Donald Trump's looking at, and he's mentioned this, how come Europe reduced their interest rate and we didn't? We're looking at foreign financial conditions. What's happening with the Nike index over in Japan? What's going on with the Deutschmark in Germany? These are things, as we have said, we're in a global economy, but it's limited. We have to be aware, and that's what the Federal Reserve is doing. And I think Jerome Powell and them, they are looking at what's going on. Plus, the Federal Reserve also gives us a little bit of an insulator into radical market changes that could happen in Europe and elsewhere. So they're looking for that, quote, 2% benchmark. We know inflation has come down. We do know unemployment's down. Like I said, I know here in Georgia, we're paying 50 cents a gallon less than gas than we were a year or so ago. So that's keeping money in the consumer's pocket. So I believe things are working. We can see them. Yes, the Donald's looking at Europe, seeing this happen. And yes, he wants it to happen here. However, we're going to have to wait. Just wait till that little benchmark gets hit at 2%.
Well, Dante, do you fear that Trump's threats power toward the Fed signal a move toward authoritarian economy control, similar to how other world leaders have manipulated central banks?
Yeah, well, it sure appears to be that way. It sure seems like it, that the president can just make a call and demand that interest rates be slashed. And guess what? They're doing it over in Europe. Why can't we do it here? Make it happen. And if it was just that easy, if it was just that simple. But it seems like the president believes that if leaders and dictators and people who have brought pain and suffering to their people, if they can do it, why can't he do it?
Well, to go on that, as I just said, he can sit here and complain and demand. But however, the checks and balances that we have here are working. He might not like it. Other people might not like it. And I understand. Like I said, you're not going to make everybody happy. But as Dante just said, when he makes these demands and they don't happen, we know that the government, for once in this one instance, is working the way it should.
Well, in recent years, we've seen the Fed become more transparent. Is increased transparency enough to maintain public trust? Dante, or do you believe trust in the Fed is already eroding?
Yeah, it's already eroding. I think where we saw, even dating back to the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, 2010, when the bailouts happened that benefited so many Fortune 500 companies, so many banks, the automotive industry. When we saw it happen again at the onset of the pandemic, the airline industry was bailed out and given so many millions of dollars to keep their shareholders happy. And so here we are again, and I'm going to keep lifting this up. Congress rolling back consumer protections at an all-time high. And so the American people are believing, like, really, we can now see what's happening. And we don't know if we really feel comfortable trusting the federal government. It was maybe 50 years ago, you walk into your local bank and put money in there. You knew you were going to get a fair loan. But now it's been said that in Black and brown communities, it is much easier to take out a loan for a house than it is to start a business. While you're seeing other people do what they want to do. Now, I don't want to take this down the wrong road, but I do want to say this. We are looking at this level of transparency, and we're saying that the American public is not happy. And we do see that the Federal Reserve now is in conflict with the White House, and everybody's wondering, what's really going on?
Well, David, what is your comment about that?
Well, I don't want to go through COVID because the former administration, when you get hit with a pandemic, it's a first. It's a lot of big learning curve for everybody here in the U.S. So as far as economic stuff, it was a very first time event. Now when we go back to 08 to 010, we can look at what was going on. We look at the subprime mortgage that people didn't understand. Here again, this is what happens when people do not understand economics. They didn't. Most of the homeowners, they were in apartments. Hey, for an extra $50 a month, we'll throw you in a house. But nobody told them, and they were not educated about what the extra cost to homeownership is. Yes, you have to fix the appliances. You have to do this. You. And oh, by the way, hey, let me tell you about that balloon note that's coming up. So remember, and here in this county, we were number one for bankruptcies. I mean, it hit this county hard. Now, when we go back to the feds, the Federal Reserve Bank, let's look at this. And I had to write this down because if Dante and I talk, we're talking about local like, our new ethics bill, HB 1441. So we just rattle it off. With the federal government, unfortunately, each week report H.4.1 is a statistical release. It presents a balance sheet for each Federal Reserve Bank. That's why I want to make sure I wrote that down to get it correctly. Now, you also have a consolidated sheet for all 12 reserve banks who lists assets, liabilities, and commitments. Now, doing this, to me, is a way to put out to the people, hey, guys, here's what we're doing, here's where we're at. And I know it's also maybe boring to read that sheet, but when members of the Federal Reserve testify before Congress, yes, that show is not going to win sweeps weeks. Not going to happen. It's statistically presented for informational purposes, but it's something that is done in front of the American public so they can follow.
This question is for both of you. Will a third Trump administration risk market instability if investors believe the Fed could be pressured into political decision? And when we say the third term for Trump, we are referring to 2028. It's already around campaigning everywhere, even hats, MAGA hats that says 2028. What is your comment, Dante, and then David?
I think it's absolutely absurd that we are entertaining this idea. Maggie, I know that we want to talk about it because it's creating this illusion of possibility, but I don't want to even dignify the possibility of a third term because constitutionally this is impossible, and I don't think that this country could survive a third term of this president.
David.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that somebody's just poking people with a stick, getting them stirred up. Do I see a third term? No. You know, what we've learned over the years, decades and such, is that countries that have an independent banking system, central bank, if you will, that are free from political influence, provide a better outcome for the citizens. Now, you can try and influence, you can yell and holler all you want to, but these members, they know their job, they know what they've got to do, and they understand they're going to catch, just like any judge would. If a judge makes a decision you don't like, yeah, he's probably going to catch some flack for it. But what we do see is, I've said before, being the Federal Reserve operates autonomously, that these members are free from political influence, even though they might hear about it, but they are responsible to the American people and to Congress. If Congress has questions, this is what I said, there are times when the Federal Reserve members do testify in front of Congress. So if you would like to see what's going on, please, it's open to the public.
Dante, we have seen President Trump, and he doesn't respect anything. He doesn't respect the judges, the court, Congress. He manipulates everything. He just keeps signing presidential orders. And some say Democrats weaponize the Fed too, particularly when progressive members push for climate and racial equity agendas through banking policy. Is that not politicization as well? And
oh yeah, great question, Maggie. Great question. So when you have what's deemed as progressive that are asking for the continuation of minority participating banks in America. 20 years ago, there were nearly 50 minority participating banks in the United States. Today, that number is less than 15. Now, why is that significant? Why is that important? Since you're accusing us of weaponizing, let me tell you why. Minority participating banks are really the bedrock of minority communities. And when you remove the minority participating banks out of the minority community, then you'll see less home ownership, less small business development, kids receiving monies to go to school, business owners getting money. This is what DEI was all about. Monies to start businesses, put products on the shelves, schools, universities. I could go on and on about this for the next half hour here on the hot seat, but I'm gonna bring it into a close here to say that you want to accuse us and call us progressive. What's progressive about asking to have a minority participating bank in my community to help with the stabilization and the economic development of my community? Well, I got a president who wants to simply wave his magic wand so that he can get the interest rate, so that his base, his investors, his friends can continue to control this economy.
Well, we know the Democrats, and I'll go with this case because it went all the way to Supreme Court. When Maria T. Vullo, in New York State Department of Financial Superintendent, urged banks and insurers to cut ties with the NRA. Now, Governor Cuomo requested this as a backdoor of gun control and of Democratic control influence, if you will, over someone that they didn't like, they didn't approve, they didn't want them there. Which is wild because the NRA is the original, if you will, civil rights organization founded in New York in 1871. We're the oldest. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court brought this in March 18th, 2024, and I'll tell you how outrageous it was from the Democrats in New York. The ACLU, think about this, the ACLU joined the NRA. because they urged that the New York officials were abusing their authority in power in violation of the First Amendment. Now think about that. Two people that you never think would get together, the NRA and the ACLU, bonding over violation of First Amendment rights. So I know that's the most famous process that has happened in as far as weaponization.
Well, Dante, should Congress consider legislation to further protect Fed's independence, or is that just another layer of bureaucracy?
Well, Congress, as I've been saying all show long, have not done anything to help the American people. I doubt that they would ever put any legislation on the floor that would ask for the Federal Reserve to do what they're supposed to do and to ask the president to stay out of that affair. So, Maggie, I hate to be, somewhat apathetic about it, but I just don't see how this Congress, who has done nothing that will put together any meaningful legislation to benefit the Federal Reserve.
David?
Well, the protections are already in place. As I've stated before, demotions are not permitted or removal is not permitted for what your feelings are if you are with the Federal Reserve Board of Governors or if you're Jerome Powell. You can't be fired just because of a disagreement. Okay, so that is protected under the law. So since those people, the Fed, are already protected by the law, my question would be, why reinvent the wheel? They're already protected. The president can't fire them. They can't demote them. He cannot touch them. He might disagree with them.
Yeah, but David, we're not talking about firing. We're talking about harassment. What protections does the Federal Reserve Chair have from being publicly humiliated by the president?
Well, I would say you're probably a public official, and being a public official, people have the right to argue back and forth and even stand up. And we have one of the most vocal people. AOC has no problem running her mouth and arguing against people and condemning. So it goes both ways. I mean, either everybody's going to tame down, which I believe you'll go with me on this. And we've talked about due process already on this show.
Right.
So how far are we going to start restricting rights against those politicians or officials? It's a very fine line, and I do understand what you're talking about. But I think you'll agree with me, it's a fine line that we might not want to cross. We can go up to it. I don't want to go over it myself.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for coming. This really got hot in the hot seat interview. Certainly, there are concerns. The society as a whole has a concern about the disrespect that publicly our president has demonstrated against Fed Powell. And we have seen in one of the last news how President Trump slapped Powell on the back. I think that was so disrespectful. And I had to say it. Still, I don't have to agree with someone, but I don't have to disrespect the person publicly. And that's important, that we live in a society that is civilized. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for coming.
Maggie, as always, it's been great. And as usual, we're going to come back, and I think we need to come back and revisit this a few months from down the road and see what the results are of our discussion and how we can look back.
Dante.
Maggie, indeed, today was a hot seat experience, and I'm thankful that we were able to have this necessary conversation.
Definitely. Well, this is Maggy Martinez, the hot seat interview. Until next time.